It's time again for Talking Trade, sponsored by MMAC's World Trade Association and Michael Best Strategies.
Welcome to Talking Trade. I'm Sandi, Seigel, president of ME-Day.
And I'm Ken Wasylik, managing director of EM Wasylik and Associates, an international business development company. Well, we're very pleased today to have our guest, James Iversen. He's an industry analyst for ABI Research. James works in the industrial and manufacturing service area of ABI Research, and he examines innovative technologies and emerging trends in global manufacturing, including how manufacturing is changing with technological advances and AI with a center focus of that. So James, welcome to Talking Trade.
Yep, thank you so much for having me. Great introduction. Today's conversation will really revolve around what ABI has been doing over the last 6 months in regards to a survey that we conducted. The survey was responded to by 450 decision level manufacturers in both the US and Germany. So we have a lot of statistics, information about how exactly German and US manufacturers are seeing issues in their workplace, in their factories, and a lot of other things, and a lot of similarities there, but just as many differences. Let's say that.
Well, as you know, the Midwest is manufacturing is a key economic sector here in the Midwest, and especially in Wisconsin as well. You mentioned that you did this research comparing German companies against American companies, and I understand you looked at, just as you mentioned, that there's many different aspects that you looked at. So can you give us an overall summary of that survey and how German companies are focusing on technological advances versus Americans, or is it basically similarities and we're all trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I could do that. I think to give an overall summary in just one sentence, German and US manufacturers, they have a very similar investment priority when it comes to the deployment of new technology, like you were saying. And, they kind of hope to achieve the same, if not very, very similar goals when they do finally end up deploying these new technologies. So to elaborate a little bit further on that aspect, the survey has indicated that the single most pressing issue faced by both the US and German manufacturers currently is the problem of product quality and just minimizing the average number of defects in components. Now, this is, pretty fairly standard. Every single manufacturer on the globe, regardless of industry, is always looking to improve their quality, making sure that they have products that fly off the door, off the shelf, that are of the best quality and are really looking to minimize those defects. I think where you have a little bit of, let's say, discourse between the two is further down. I would say it's more on the IT side. So, for instance, when we're surveying the IT departments of a lot of these manufacturers, one thing that was abundantly clear is that network and security issues are now the top concern of US manufacturers. It is slightly less in German manufacturers. They're still looking predominantly at eliminating data silos, minimizing the costs of utilizing big data centers to store all your data and your pipelines. So that would be kind of the biggest difference on that aspect of, okay, what's happening in terms of their IT departments. It's really, structured as if the US is trying to fight, all these news stories that we're hearing about cyber attacks, IP theft, data breaches, etc. They're seeing that as a bigger priority for manufacturers in the US, but in Germany, they're really, really looking at just how to consolidate a lot of these issues that they're having with siloed data that is in places still stored on Excel, not necessarily in a software or a platform, and then again minimizing those expenditures on data centers and how you store historic and then real-time data.
Interesting. So obviously you touched on some of the differences. Are there other areas? I mean, we know we have similar objectives. And of course, German manufacturing is known for its precision and high quality. So it's an interesting, data that came out of this survey. Can you speak at all to some of the environmental concerns and green manufacturing and responsibility? I believe the German government is as committed as we are to addressing some of those issues. Do you see differences in some of those disciplines or other areas where, we might be looking at our objectives a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think to answer the question, it's a little bit confusing, or at least contradicting to what you may think at first. When you think of Germany, you think of, they have a very rigid and very compact sustainability target goals, especially when it comes to CO2 emissions and worker safety and all of that. That being said, this has been around for a very long time. In the US, it is not so rigid. It has not been built out for as long. Therefore, German manufacturers have already made that transition. So when you talk about core issues of sustainability and environment, for German manufacturers, they have, I don't want to say solved the issue, because I think this issue still has a long way to go. But generally speaking, German manufacturers are ahead of the curve on this. US manufacturers are catching up, and this is one of their priorities. However, they are still a little bit a ways, behind the pack on this one.
Sure. Yeah, well, and I think some of that shifts for us as the politics change and our focus
Of course.
and how we might want to approach that. So of course, on everybody's mind, conversation, and so forth, and you touched on this a little bit, is AI, robotics, and big topics for all our industries, and certainly manufacturers, and optimizing productivity and efficiencies and so forth. So tell us about that and the focus in Germany, and how that's being approached, and how they're embracing it.
Yes. So
big topic. I know. Big topic.
I was
in
going to say
small
that's a big topic,
conversation.
and I was thinking whether or not I should focus on the productivity standpoint or the shrinking workforce. I'll start with the shrinking workforces.
Okay.
From what I'm seeing right now, the biggest problem that has been illustrated by yourself, Sandi, and also just in all the research that not just myself but ABI has been covering, is this exodus of manufacturers and skilled workers in this environment. And essentially, the number that is leaving is not being replaced adequately enough with competent and proficient workers. So one of the technologies that we're talking about before, AI, and specifically generative AI, that is going to be one of the problem solvers for this shrinking workforce. Now, do I think this is a bulletproof solution? Rolling out generative AI co-pilots to kind of assist in new hire proficiency, getting them up to speed and up to standard, I don't think it's going to be the complete solution. I think this is more of a band-aid until we find the correct long-term solution. So I think that would be the position right now of generative AI in terms of how it's actually helping the shrinking workforces. In terms of, do I see this being deployed more by German or US manufacturers? I would say I don't see a difference there. I see a difference in industry. So when I'm thinking of Germany, I think of these large automotive suppliers and large automotive manufacturers. They have started to take steps to incorporate generative AI solutions in that space. For US side, I think it's more like the aerospace. So for instance, Boeing is doing a lot in this aspect too. So it's not really a difference between the countries and the manufacturers in the countries, but more so an industry level of difference, where it's large scale discrete manufacturers doing more into generative AI to help bridge that skills gap between leaving employees and new employees. But generally speaking, they are adopting at similar rates, at least for those two industries. Now, when you get further into, let's say, process industries, they do have use cases in generative AI. They are less so for the shrinking workforces, and they are adopting at less or lower levels than typical large scale discrete manufacturers. So I think that would be like the sticking point there for the shrinking workforces. Now, kind of moving on to productivity and digitalization, which was the other side of the question. This again is also a um, an issue that is being solved in Germany and the US to a very fairly similar degree. And what I mean by that is both Germany and the US are very much on board with cloud and SaaS solutions, which I see as the defining future for what both small manufacturers, mid-sized manufacturers, and large manufacturers, regardless of industry, what they are kind of looking to achieve. So in terms of, okay, how does this help productivity? Well, if you look at what SaaS offers versus an on-premise software solution, you'll see that the main driving point is that enhanced collaboration. It's real time. You'll be put into Teams calls traditionally, or you'll have a massive email thread with all the changes to your products and all that. That has historically led to inaccuracies, faults, and just longer conversations. Now with real-time data flows in products like PLM solutions, there's a lot in CAD and ERP too. With this SaaS transition of these historically legacy on-prem solutions, that digitalization to take it to the cloud and take it to a SaaS-based platform that has significantly enhanced employee productivity, and that of
Right.
course has a trickle down effect to how exactly a manufacturer can improve productivity when it turns to the output speed and the quality of their products.
Well, that's really interesting. So let's just move a little bit. Here in the United States, there's many, if not hundreds, of U.S. subsidiaries of German parents. And it's a wide range from the Mittelstand all the way to large companies as well. And I know here in Wisconsin, there's probably close to 50. And I personally know at least 10 of them. And I've always seen that there's differences in management styles, right? The German management style and then the more um, open door American style. How do German companies reconcile these cultural differences, or is it the same problem, same sausage, but one's with barbecue sauce and one's with Lowensenf, or how do they approach this?
Yes, it's a little bit of a both kind of answer. Again, maybe a little bit of a cop out here, but yeah, it is sort of the same sausage. So the U.S. manufacturers that do have a presence here, especially in Wisconsin and the Midwest, they are typically, not always, but typically have headquarters in Germany, have a well-established doctrine of how things get done. A lot of times that gets transitioned over to the U.S. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's where you'll see those issues arise. So I think prior to this call, you were mentioning that you knew a few of these German manufacturers, and you were telling me that the German employees here were kind of saying, okay, well, this is how things should be done, and this is the way that we should be operating. Yes, there are these traditional ways to operate in Germany, which can be more rigid, more refined, and more, let's say, direct and to the point, as a lot of Germans are. But in the U.S., the way I see it is that when I look at large manufacturers, they do have that American presence when they are over here in the States. So they'll have the management structure of a typical American large manufacturer. So in terms of, do I see these massive cultural differences? From my research, I don't. If you were looking at smaller manufacturers that may not have a significant presence back home in Germany, that are now in the US, and they have a mixed workforce of German and US employees, yes, I can see them butting heads on significant issues regarding, okay, so what software, what technology should we be looking into? What is the best way to optimize your machine output? How are we going to deal with predictive maintenance? All these things can be let's say issues when it comes to butting heads between German nationals and U.S. employees here. But generally, on the whole, if it's a large enough company that has been established and been around long enough, those barriers can quickly become torn down.
Yeah, pretty similarly aligned. And listen, you don't need to be multicultural to butt heads on some of these
No, that is,
topics. I
that
assure
is
you.
true. That is true.
James, I love to learn more. It's been fascinating research and information you've shared. Thank you for being our guest today. And thank you to everyone for joining us on another episode of Talking Trade.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Talking Trade, sponsored by MMAC's World Trade Association and Michael Best Strategies.